Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce here on the Final Say Radio Show with your host, Brett Rappaport and John Rappaport, Congressman Phil Rowe, who comes from the great state of Tennessee. Dr. Rowe, welcome back to the program.
Brett, thanks for having me. John, thanks for having me on. It is a great state of Tennessee, and it's been wonderful to be home, and we're doing what I'm doing around my district, John, this election cycle is I'm doing as many small town halls as I can get to. We've done them in, I don't know, maybe 10 so far. We've done them in senior centers. We've done them in little places called White Pine and Bluff City, and I'm going to every small community I can. And what I've found out, there is a huge enthusiasm or need for us as politicians to go out and meet with people. We've had standing room audiences everywhere we've been. I'm doing another one tomorrow night. I did a telephone town hall from a senior center the other day. I did the town hall that we do on the basically on the phone, but I did it live in a senior center and had them interact during the town hall. It went great, and so there's a lot of interest out there right now on what's going on in the country, and the voters are getting cued in.
Congressman, quick question for you before we get into the meat of the matter here. Are you finding, as you're doing these town hall meetings, that these people are feeling desperate and asking for government to help, or are you finding that they realize that there's a level of austerity and sacrifice that we all have to make collectively, and that they want government to, for lack of a better word, get out of the way? Is there a general consensus you're feeling?
It is. There are. It is the latter. And what they're concerned about is, at least in the 1st District of Tennessee, the home of Davy Crockett, I might add, so to put that out there, Brad, is that people are worried, and they're concerned about the direction, they're concerned about the debt, I was at a senior center for a little town hall for lunch today in Morristown, Tennessee, and those folks there are worried about what their grandchildren are going to be left, and they're not concerned about so much about themselves. I mean, they want those programs that were promised to them to deliver the promise, and I totally agree with them on that. If we've made a promise on Medicare or Social Security, we should keep that promise for our senior citizens. But they're not beyond sacrifice. This is a generation that has. That most of these folks in their senior years went through a depression, not a recession, but a depression in the 30s, and a world war. So they're not averse to sacrificing for the future. They've done it. And they don't mind doing that, but they are concerned about too much government. I don't get here, at least in our district, we don't get that, hey, we need more government programs, more this, more that. I don't hear that.
Sure. Now, Congressman Rowe, we've had Scott Rasmussen joins us weekly on the program, and when we ask him, when you poll, what are the people most concerned about, he says, number 1, 2, and 3 are economy, economy, economy. Number 4 is ethics and corruption. So when you're holding these town halls, what are the greatest concerns of the people who you meet?
I think, Brad and John, the major concern, as Scott said, is, and he's a very good pollster, by the way, is that they're worried about the economy. They're worried about their jobs. And they're beginning to understand that the burdensome debt can affect how and if they get a job. They also understand when they start talking to their employers, and by the way, employers are bringing me into their businesses and asking me to come there, and I had an employer in a manufacturing plant the other day that stopped his manufacturing process, brought all of his employees in for basically a town hall. And so they're concerned about overregulation. These folks are worried about losing their job overseas or so much regulation. They're worried about the health care bill now as it's going to come into effect really in 2014, but some more next year in 2013, is that is my employer going to be able to afford health insurance coverage? Are they going to drop me into this exchange? What's the exchange? I mean, all these questions that you can't answer right now. There is no answer to it. So the answer, it's what I've said, and Brett, there is a mood out there, and these are folks. I took my grandchildren out the other day to a theme park called Dollywood, and hadn't had a chance to do that this year, so I took a day, went to the theme park. One of the guys running the theme park ride that we were taking the grandkids on recognized me, and he said, "What'd you think about the Pick a Paw ride?" I mean, this man who was running the theme was very engaged. In other words, average citizens are worried and concerned, and they're very engaged in the national process right now.
Now, you'd mentioned health care, so I want to jump into that real quickly, because what I've learned from you, speaking to you over the last few years, is that your greatest concern as a doctor is the relationship and the care that is given between you, the doctor, and the patient. And that you felt all along that the healthcare law impedes the physician's ability to treat the patients and drastically decreases the medical innovation and significantly limits the choices that we have in healthcare.
You know, Brett, you obviously that is exactly what I've been saying. I had lunch with a friend of mine yesterday, and this particular friend has a cancer called multiple myeloma, and he said, and he's a physician, and he's a very knowledgeable physician. And he said, Phil, he said, you know, my chemotherapy was $10,000 a month. He said that's a lot of money per month. But he said much of that money, some of it, spent on the drug, some of it, spent on profit for the company that made the drug. But he said that company is also investing heavily in research to try to find the next best drug to treat this disease so that maybe I'll live a normal life expectancy. And just as an example, he shared with me, he said MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, Texas, spends more on cancer research. That's one hospital in Houston, Texas, than the entire country of Canada. So what do we do with that information when we pay for it here in America and we learn about it? We share it with the world. That's what we do. And I am extremely concerned as a practicing 31-year doctor that went in every day with my stethoscope around my neck and saw patients, listened to their problems, delivered their family members, operated on them, was more and more intrusion from insurance companies and from the federal government into that physician-patient relationship. Look, when you have something like my friend has, he's got to be involved in the decision-making. And the doctor, his doctor has got to be involved in the decision-making. And the more you inject other people that don't have a personal in the outcome, are not going to make. They're going to make those decisions based on something what's not in your best interest, and that's what, Brett, I've been saying. That's what concerns me about this health care bill, and I've screamed it from the top of the roof. And anybody that will listen on this Affordable Care Act, the so-called Obamacare, on the Independent Payment Advisory Board for our Medicare patients, that is a dangerous slide to get on. And what this board does, 15 unelected bureaucrats, one of whom has to be a doctor. The rest of them can be bean counters. And here you are deciding on how Medicare dollars are spent. That's a very bad idea.
Well, I'm going to refer to you as Dr. Rowe for the purposes of this conversation, because for this conversation, I think it's the more important job that you have. But first, I'm sorry to hear about your friend. I truly wish him well. But I think when you look at the idea of having not only a board, but certainly a board of bean counters making the decisions from a distance and getting between doctor and patient care, I worry not only about the restrictions that they put on the care, but the overwhelming concept of saving money in the single payer system seems to be to put the government in a big negotiating position to drive rates down. And what that means is forcing the doctors to make less money. Doctors already are trending, my understanding, to having less and less time to spend with their patients. Isn't this effect likely to be far worse? Because not only will they be losing their relationship and decision power, but they'll be spending far less time with the patients?
No, there's no doubt about that. And you're already looking at what's happening in Massachusetts, where the state now, it's consuming, and look, I wrote an article with Marsha Blackburn, Congressman Blackburn from Tennessee, 3 years ago in July, about what TennCare, our Tennessee Medicaid, our attempt at health care reform did in the state of Tennessee, and what it did to the budget. I reread that the other day. I hadn't read it in a while. I reread it. It is so applicable to what's going to happen with Obamacare. And already in Massachusetts, the governor up there has got a board of 8 people that are going to, for doctors to maintain their licensure, they're going to have their rates approved by these folks. Not what their costs are, but how much can you charge. And we're heading on the way very quickly, Brett and John. I don't know how long it will take. It may not be in my lifetime. I predict that it will be, that we'll end up with a single-payer system. A lot of people think that's fine. Dennis Kucinich wants that system. What happens with a single-payer system is that when you have more demand for services and you have money to pay for it, you get in a line. and then you begin to ration care. I mean, that's how all the single payer systems work. That's the valve in Canada for care is America. If you can't get the care there, you can come down here and get the care. But when there's no place else to go, I'm afraid there is no place else to go but the United States after that. I predict what will happen then is you'll develop these little boutique-type practices where it's either on a ship or somewhere where people with money will go get the care they need, and other people will get in line and queue up.
And the irony is the expectation, because I agree with you. In fact, I won't mention who, but I know somebody personally who's actually involved in financing and building some of these offshore sort of floating international cities, if you will. And I would imagine that, and in fact I already got firsthand knowledge that one of the first things they're looking at are things like medical care, and they're going to get the best and the brightest doctors, right? Because just like New York firms will go after Ivy League grads, they're going to do the same thing.
No question about it. You'll get the best and brightest, and what's already happening, Brad, is that people now are in anticipation of what's going on with Obamacare. They're basically hiring a boutique doctor. They'll pay a doctor so many dollars a year just to be my doctor. Hey, I have one in Washington, D.C. right now I do that with, so that I've got someone on call for me to take care of my problems if I had anything that comes up. Problem with it is, what's everybody else going to do? And that's the thing that I think worries me as a doctor here in Appalachia, which is where I practiced. And I took care of people with no education all the way up to doctors and PhDs at the medical school and the university here. So, but I saw a lot of people, and these folks have become good friends of mine after I took care of them for 30 years. They weren't just patients; they were friends. I know these people personally. I've operated on their cancers and gotten them well. And what do they do? I mean, what does a guy up Stony Creek in a mountain near me, what does that guy do, and what does his family do when this comes to full fruition? And that's not to say, and we've talked about, there are some good things in the Affordable Care Act. I'm not saying that all 2,700 pages are bad. It's not. But we don't need this type of health care reform. I would shout that, and am shouting it from the roof, and you all have certainly reported it in the times I've listened on your show.
Well, we're going to continue to report it and scream it from the mountaintops. So one of the challenges I find, just taking my my talking head hat on and just being a normal guy, Facebook has become just an immense machine of information and often misinformation, right? And
correct.
How is there an ideal source that you would point to, and one that we can connect on the Final Say radio show, for example, people to that would just, for the average person who doesn't have a lot of time to really figure out all the facts and demystify and let them know what the good, the bad, and the ugly is, and whether they should be behind or against this Obamacare bill?
One of the things I would, and I don't want to plug myself, but I mean, I'm sort of narcissistic doing that, but my website in Washington, you can go to and just look me up, and we've got some pretty good information on when all of this comes to fruition. In other words, when do all of these things, it is such a complicated bill, when does this happen and what happens to me? Number two, if you'll look up the policy committee, and I can't give you the website right now, but the policy committee in D.C., it's Tom Price. The Health Caucus, which we have, has a website. So we have two websites that you can go and get some pretty good information. If you are a senior, actually my office and Dr. Tom Coburn, Senator Coburn, produced a product, and you can go to his website or mine. And then we've got all the doctors in the Doctors Caucus in June. It's a doctor's note on Medicare. And we separate the facts from fiction, so that as we see that and how it affects our patients. So you can pull. It's a great piece of information. So, and this is all documented, factual information, not some baloney or political baloney. These are just the facts about Medicare as it is today. So those are three pretty good places you can go to look up some meaningful information.
Well, on our website, underneath our Congress page, we have row.house.gov, and I think we will add some of those individual items on there as well. Now, Congressman, you recently put out a release, and you were discussing numerous things from domestic energy production and what you think could be a good road to lowering our unemployment problem. As you so carefully point out, for 42 consecutive months, we've had an unemployment rate that has been above 8%.
Brett, the longest time in my lifetime, and that it's been above 8%. And I think this is one of the most exciting things. And I didn't go to a government website. I was actually looking for some info, and I didn't go to a think tank. I didn't go to Heritage or Brookings or Cato, all good places. Didn't go to the Congressional Research Service. I went to the people that make the money. That's the Citicorp has an analysis, an energy analysis that they put out. If you want to look at it, I would encourage everybody. It's about 20 pages. A lot of it's graphs, so you can read the meat of it in 15 or 20 minutes. And the most exciting part to me is that we have an opportunity in America in less than 8 years to be completely energy independent. And they even believe, and these are people that are looking at the future of the stock market and energy, they believe we can be a net exporter of energy and use less oil than we're currently using right now in 8 years. That is exciting, and they think we can create 3.5 million jobs and add 3% to GDP. Hey, why aren't we doing that yesterday? And, I mean, with jobs being the biggest issue we've got out there now, with so many people looking for work and so many people underemployed in I mean, it was a ticket when I graduated from college. I don't know of anybody that didn't get a job after college. And now half of our college graduates are either underemployed or not employed at all.
Now, looking at that strategy, just off the bat, adding 3% to our GDP, which is just over 1%, which isn't even keeping up with inflation, puts us at a nice, healthy pace in the 4% range, which is what I think is comfortable for our economy. Additionally, when you look at a plan that could potentially, within, say 8 or even 10 years, if we wanted to become energy independent, that means that we're no longer shipping U.S. dollars in support of countries that are, in many cases, bad players. We're keeping that here at home. And so it's a win-win. I applaud this kind of a plan.
You're absolutely right, and it actually gets better than that. When you start talking to people out there, and I met with a bunch of people today, business people here in Morristown, Tennessee, and there's a lot of manufacturing here in this town. What's better about it is inexpensive energy, and this report that Citicorp put out believes that we'll begin to trend manufacturing back into this country. And what that means is that's good for our technology centers, our junior colleges, our community colleges that are going to train people for these jobs that are coming back. And we're beginning to see it. We had a company bring 150 jobs back into Johnson City, Tennessee, my hometown, this past year from Indonesia, a flooring company. And you're beginning to hear about it more and more. And with inexpensive energy and a reliable source so that we know that OPEC can't cut it off, and the Straits of Hormuz are 20 miles wide now, and they'll be 20 miles wide 100 years from now. So that danger over there of having a non-reliable Middle Eastern oil, us dependent on that, puts us at risk. And that's the thing I couldn't understand, Brett and John, about the Keystone Pipeline, is that why in the world, when we've got one of our best neighbors, Canada, who wants to sell us oil that's as stable as you can get, would almost do away with our need for Middle Eastern oil, why wouldn't we do that? As a matter of fact, we have a president who would gain the most from that if he did that. And I would like for someone to ask President Obama why, when you are definitely holding jobs up. And let me explain one of the jobs that got lost. There's a guy in my state, he doesn't live in my district, but in the state of Tennessee, in the western part of the state, that has a right-of-way clearing company. He had a contract. He was going to buy a bunch of new equipment, hire a bunch of new employees, and for him it was the three apples. He's going to clear 187 miles of right-of-way for the Keystone Pipeline. That's lots of jobs, lots of new equipment, and guess what? He's not doing any of that now. We don't think about small business people like that. They'll be out hiring, helping families, helping communities when you do that. So I wish someone would ask the president, why? 3 letters.
And this is largely a political decision, which makes it even worse. Go ahead, John.
It is, and all these, not only that, but of all the crazy, I'll just leave it at that, my words, executive orders and decisions that have been made, this is the kind of thing that would make sense as an executive decision because it's truly about national security.
Absolutely,
Both from a jobs and an energy perspective.
John, I was in Korea in 1973 at Camp Casey, about 11 miles south of the DMZ. We had an oil embargo then. We got heat 3 hours a day through 2 Korean winters. I remember very well. I was a young officer there at the 2nd Infantry Division at Camp Casey, and we had to keep fuel. We could only heat our hooches, our Quonset huts, 3 hours a day because we had to keep the fuel for our tanks, our Cobra helicopters, and so forth. So I already know from firsthand it is a national security issue. And John, I don't know if it was you or Brett that brought this up, but think about all the resources that stay here in this country. And if our listeners don't remember anything that I say today, remember this one thing, how it affects you. When gasoline goes up 25 cents, it takes $35 billion out of the consumer's hip pocket. 25 cents it goes up, $35 billion goes out of our pockets that we can't spend on school supplies or, a vacation or paying off your debt or your credit cards or whatever you want. So $1 is $140 billion that goes out, and most of that is, as you all pointed out, leaves the country, or much of it does.
And it ends up in the hands of people who don't like us.
At all.
Not one bit.
So I think this is exciting. I'm more excited about this opportunity in energy than I have been about anything in a long time. And if we had any kind of coherent energy policy in this country, we will be according to not me, but according to an independent analysis by the money people, by business people, we could be a net exporter of energy. I think that is exciting, and they think when that happens, manufacturing comes back. And what I've been hearing is, let me tell you from a personal basis, I grew up in a manufacturing. I grew up on a farm, and then my father worked in a plant making shoe heels. He worked in a factory. He lost his job to Mexico in 1973 when I was overseas in the Army. 50 years old, post-World War II, high school education, no job. This is a way to reconstruct the middle class in this country, and I think we ought to be jumping at that. And we talk about how the middle class has lost out and gone backwards, and that's absolutely right. This is a way to reinvigorate the middle class.
I couldn't agree with you any more, Congressman. I just want to add this before I let you go. I've learned in my studies of economics that manufacturing, more than any other industry, when you create a manufacturing job, as a rule of thumb, you create approximately 4 jobs in support of that manufacturing job, meaning somewhere in the supply chain or local restaurants or companies that grow around big manufacturing plants. The closest industry, I believe, is 1.8 jobs. So manufacturing is the way to job growth, and we can't do it any differently than we have in the past. This country grew on cheap energy, and it will continue to grow in the future on cheap energy.
Totally agree with you. Example right here in my home community, A.O. Smith make water heaters, 1,400 employees. If you buy water heaters from Lowe's, we made it in Johnson City, Tennessee. But guess what? A company that I visited last week makes the packaging that goes around to ship that water heater. And guess what? Another friend of mine owns a trucking company that transports that water heater. So you're right. I mean, it's all the spin-offs of the other jobs, and that doesn't have anything to do with the mall and the restaurants and all the other places, the gasoline stations and all that are supported by these manufacturing jobs. So you're absolutely right. I'm more excited about this energy because the energy is the piece of the puzzle that and I don't know whether it was Brett or John that said this, but inexpensive energy is what's going to separate us from the world. And before we hang up, I want to say one thing. I was very proud. My father was a union member and a manufacturer, worked in a manufacturing plant. I was very proud. He made shoe heels that I wore on my shoes. And our manufacturers, we're still the most productive country in the world. I went to China 2 months ago. 1.4 billion people. 300 million American workers still outproduce them. And think about that. That is something to be proud of. And we just need to give our workers an opportunity. They are the most productive in the world, and I'm very proud of that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and you bring up a good point that, you know, we are not against manufacturers or the workers. In fact, the things that we're arguing for make our economy stronger, create the jobs, build the middle class, and support the very base of people who often, you know, they join up in these unions that seem to go on the, you know, opposite side of where we stand in the issues. But I think they've got that a little bit wrong. I think they're kind of misreading what we've been saying all along. Well,
they certainly have from my standpoint, and I am totally behind the workers that in these manufacturing areas and jobs, and that's what I want to do. Is I want to create policies in this country, sane policies. Not, I mean, the regulations, Brett, that go. I could spend. And I chair the subcommittee on health, employment, labor, and pensions. So I do labor issues in my subcommittee that I chair, and it drives me crazy when I see these companies that are being regulated to the point of insanity. I mean, the thousands of pages. Think about this, and we've talked about this before. Over 13,000 pages of rules that I've got to sift through to take care of a patient in the Affordable Care Act. 13, and they're still writing rules. It's crazy. I mean, how does that help me take care of a patient? It doesn't. How does that help a manufacturer create a product? It doesn't.
And that doesn't include all the probably 3 times that in tax pages you have to do to run your medical practice.
And I feel your pain.
Well, I tell people that, look, I got through organic chemistry and physics and calculus, all that stuff in college. I wouldn't even attempt to do my taxes because I'm afraid I'd end up in jail. So I have to hire somebody to do that.
Well, I've practiced in accounting for over 10 years, and I'll tell you, it's absolutely the most frustrating thing to see the amount of tax law changes and things that get added to it, knowing that even the most basic tax return that today somebody with the most basic thing, just a W-2 and nothing else, can't even prepare their own return and do it right anymore because too often they make a mistake.
Yeah. It's. I don't want to take a chance on doing that. So,
no.
You know, I'm just hoping my accountant outlives me. Is all I hope.
No, because with the IRS, you're guilty until you prove your innocence.
Exactly, I'm guilty.
And then even then, you're still guilty. Anyway, Congressman, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us for so much time today. We always enjoy thoroughly speaking with you, and we know you'll be on again very soon.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on, Brett and John. Good talking to you again.
Good luck, John.